Just 24 hours after suggesting he may give ordinary Americans a tax cut, President Donald Trump did an about-face. He categorically withdrew the offer owing to the, quote, strong U.S. economy. Even as the hashtag Trump recession trended online, he dismissed a potential recession as irrelevant. Instead, he insisted that the real threat isn't a fiscal downturn, but China. So is the U.S. readying itself for a recession or not? Would the floated tax cuts be enough to boost the economy if a recession were to strike? And why is China once again mentioned when President Trump talks about a domestic issue? Joining me on the show are Professor Liu Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics and Max Wolff, the chief economist at iCash Group. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Now, on Tuesday, U.S. President Trump said the White House is considering tax cuts. However, he sought to clarify that the specter of recession did not sway this decision. He said, whether or not we do something now, it is not being done because of a recession. But in a stunning reversal, President Trump told reporters in White House on Wednesday that tax cuts were off the table because the U.S. economy is doing so well. He said, I'm not looking at a tax cut now. We don't need it. We have a strong economy. Professor Liu, exactly what's the state of the U.S. economy at this moment?
Well, first of all, I think, this is a very skillful political tactics. Because by saying that I'm going to have a further tax cut for you, meaning I care about you. And now I say, oh, there's no need because my management is sound enough. So economy is still very well navigated. So, right now, when you talk about the economy, you look at the GDP growth level, you talk about the employment level and also inflation. And technically, U.S. has high likelihood to get into recession because, by definition, if there's two consecutive quarters of slower growth, and then that's justifiably a recession. And right now, you see that the U.S. economy has slided from roughly 3% now to a little more than 2%, although employment is still on the high side. And more significantly is really the inverted interest curve. Yeah. So, actually, if you research into the past 60 years, and this is really a very strong precursor of heading into recession because people lose confidence in the long-term credibility of the economy.
Max, from the U.S.'s perspective, what is your judgment of the state of the U.S. economy, whether or not you're heading in a recession or whether or not you have a strong economy, or maybe two things at the same time?
Yeah, so a little bit of two things at the same time. Look, I think we've been on the edge of a recession, and we've forced ourselves not to go into it by throwing everything we have at keeping the growth rates up. And we've done that imprudently and recklessly for the political gain of various interests, including the Trump administration. So especially with President Trump, who has a very loose and intermittent relationship with the truth, and has pretty well qualified himself as untrustworthy by almost any standard globally, I think it's much more important to look at what he does than what he says, because he himself has somewhat limited concern in what he said earlier today or yesterday when he talks later today. So what he's said is things are great, I'm great, vote for me soon. But what his policies are is the Federal Reserve, whose independence he's been undermining, has to cut interest rates and keep them ultra low. And we're running $1 trillion deficits every year. That is the response to an economy that you are forcing the sort of above water because you're afraid of a serious recession. Well-known fact that the economy selects presidents as much as voters. Well-known fact that President Trump has had a persistently inadequate approval rate going into a big election here in 2020, which is meaningful and a potential turning point for his political career. So I think we're getting economic response that says, hey, we're terrified of a serious recession, while we get rhetoric that says we're strong like a bull and everybody else is to blame for any possible weakness. And on any given day, it's either the Federal Reserve, the Democratic Party, China, or whoever he thinks of next at the podium. But the bigger issue here is we are at or near a recessionary level, which is consistent with every norm and pattern we've seen since World War II. because we're at the end phase here of the longest unbroken expansion, or one of them in modern American history.
Yeah, well, President Trump also talked about China. You mentioned China. For instance, on Tuesday, he told reporters that whether it's good or bad, meaning the economy, the short term is irrelevant. We have to solve the problem with China. Professor Liu, how do you understand, why is he mentioning China in this?
Well, definitely he knows that China plays a very important role in the economic performance of the United States. And he already feels actually it's very strong implications that he knows that American consumers are beginning to suffer, and this is going to accelerate. So households are spending more, and smaller businesses are facing more difficulties in getting access to the cost level of supply from China. So he knows that. And now he said, okay, I call on you guys to be highly patriotic and support with me and bear this cost, and then you're going to have a future that is really something that he painted as a fantasy.
Yeah, well, a lot of people seem to be still buying that, seem still to believe that. Max, do you think he makes a good point, at least to these people? If so, why?
I don't think he makes coherent points to his fans, and I think his fans either don't mind or actually like that he's excited and exciting, and you never know what he's going to say, and he does always put on a good show, right? So, look, I mean, we've been hearing for over 2 years that these various tariffs are meaningless, they won't hurt anyone, they're no problem, and they'll work very quickly. They haven't worked quickly, and they look like they'd be such a problem for the average American household that we had to suspend them for Christmas, because otherwise there was a risk there'd be a disastrous Christmas. That's the words say up, the reality says down, right? So I think in this particular case, it doesn't get us very much to pay attention to what the individual says. It gets us, and he's not the only person guilty of this, but it gets us much further to pay attention to what he does. What he does is say, don't worry about the tariffs, but they're huge and they're painful and it's good for the long term. That doesn't work together. Don't worry about the tariffs, but I'll cancel them because they'll ruin Christmas. That doesn't work together. The Democrats are trying to get me. No, the Federal Reserve is trying to get me. No, it's China's fault. Those things don't work together. But I think what does work together is massive, continuous fiscal and monetary stimulus has been every day of the Trump presidency for what is good but unspectacular macroeconomic growth with spectacular stock market performance, which he tends to use as a overall economic measure, and it's a very poor and dangerous overall measure of the U.S. economy. Okay,
I have to leave it there. By the way, the Congressional Budget Office said on Wednesday that President Trump's trade war is costing average American household $580 US annually. So it's pretty clear there. Many thanks to Professor Liu Baocheng and Max Wolff joining us from the United States. And that is it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.